Hey YouTube, it's Andy here, coming at you on what is a Sunday night for me and whatever it is for you, talking about a few small updates to the 100 Ornithopters Cube. The first is adding Reaping the Graves. This is a 3-mana instant that is just a not unearth, what's the Raise Dead. It's a Raise Dead with Storm, which I did look at this card before for this cube. I basically looked for every single card with Storm that met my conditions of not allowing a player to win without an Ornithopter, which is how I ended up with cards like Haze of Rage and Corrosive Adaptation, and now Tempest Technique, all in the cube, because they will abuse Storm, but still also, not allow you to win without using Ornithopters. And Reaping the Grave certainly fits that description. And I didn't originally play it because Echoing Return is the premier recursion spell in this cube, and it sets a really high bar. A single black mana sorcery, return target creature card, and all other cards with the same name as that card from your graveyard to your hand. That's just 1 mana to buy back every single Ornithopter in your graveyard, which is crazy. It's really, really strong here, but I constantly get recommendations for cards that are, 3 or 4 mana and allow you to get back all of your Ornithopters. And the reality is that I've played a couple before, and Echoing Return is really good here, but it's not cracked, and this effect at 3 or 4 mana, generally speaking, is not worth it. So that's the reason I have, up until now, foregone including Reaping the Graves. But I'm adding it in for 2 reasons. The first is that, unlike those other 3 and 4 mana cards that return all your Ornithopters to your hand or to play, this one does actually have the chance of being better than Echoing Return, theoretically. And it's really only better in the circumstance your opponent has a counterspell, because Storm is great against counterspells. And so that's a very real thing. There's a decent amount of counter magic here that could actually mean this could be better in certain circumstances. And while it's not something that's better than Echoing Return, strictly speaking, the fact that you can kind of hijack your opponent's Storm count on their turn to buy back all your Ornithopters and untap with all your mana and, go off on your own turn makes this kind of interesting. It gives us some more texture in it, that means that it could effectively cost 0 on the turn that you actually combo off, because it is an instant, meaning you can use your mana on the turn before. So for those 2 reasons, it is possible that it could actually, in theory, in some circumstances, be better than Echoing Return. I think practically it's basically never going to happen, but nevertheless, I think it could still be playable here. But the bigger reason is that it's just cool. It's so cool. The art is awesome. I got a foil for $6 or something. That's just gorgeous. It's cool to have Storm cards in the cube. Storm is a really cool mechanic that I think people naturally are drawn to, but it ends up being a groaner if you play with it a lot, because you know that it's kind of OP or leads to some non-interactive games. But in this circumstance, where the Storm cards themselves are never the actual win conditions, they're just enabling your win conditions, they tend to not have that sort of groaner nature to them. So yeah, an opportunity to get another Storm card in here, and the fact that I can actually imagine circumstances where it's maybe better have me coming back to this. A lot of people have recommended this in the wake of the Ristic Studies video, and it was those recommendations that, even though I had seen it before, it made me go back and reconsider it, and that's why it's coming in now. So we'll see. I'm actually not sure how it's going to play, but I have high hopes. I think it could be cool. The other is a recommendation from John Clara from the Cube Talk Discord. Shout out to you, John. John suggested Decaying Soil and said he probably gets suggested this all the time, and that is not true. No one else has ever suggested this card, because I had never seen this card before. It's 1 black for an enchantment. At the beginning of your upkeep, you do have to remove a card in your graveyard from the game as a downside. Then it has an ability, Threshold. Whenever a non-token creature is put into your graveyard from play, you may pay 1 generic mana. If you do, return that card to your hand. So this is a recursion piece as well. It's a very different type of recursion card than Reaping the Graves or Echoing Return, which are the typical types of recursion cards we see in this cube. It honestly kind of reminds me a tiny bit of Pia's Revolution, but it's going to play very differently. Realistically, I think this is mostly just going to be a combo card. If you combine this with Ashnod's Altar or Krark Clan Ironworks, which will let you sacrifice an Ornithopter for 2 generic mana, you can use 1 of that generic mana to get the Ornithopter back, and then just do it again, which means that you get infinite colorless mana, infinite death triggers, infinite cast triggers, infinite ETB triggers, all of which can be combined with any number of win conditions to actually kill your opponent. And I think that's probably the most likely way this card is going to be played. So you won't care about the beginning of the upkeep downside, because you won't play this card until you're about to kill your opponent with it, basically. So that is probably the main use case. Also worth noting, it can be combined with Phyrexian Altar in exactly the same way. You just don't get the infinite colorless mana, so you have to already have your win condition in play. I'm also excited for people maybe to combine it with Fecundity and draw their deck, basically. So it's a cool synergistic combo piece. I'm also kind of hopeful it will have some fair applications, and by fair I mean not taking an arbitrary number of game actions, not generating infinite anything, but just, I've got 6 mana, I've got a Goblin Bombardment. We're at sort of a board stall, and so I'm just going to sacrifice an Ornithopter. I only need one. Sacrifice an Ornithopter and replay it 6 times and deal 6 damage to you, and then do that again next turn if I can. And hopefully that will also give you something to do in those board stalls, which I am also always looking for cards that are reasonable and give you something to do in a board stall, and this being a primarily combo card that also has this out of being a mana sink if you want to just use it that way, I think might make it good enough. Like this combines with like Skull Clamp to basically be, we still need a sack outlet. It's going to combine with some other cards in some funky ways that I'm curious to see about. So that's that. Thanks again, John, for the recommendation. I think it is very cool. I do not know how difficult it's going to be to get Threshold here. This is not a thing I've been conscious of. I've not been like paying attention to this in any of the games I've played of this cube. In theory, if you have sack outlets, you should be able to get a bunch of stuff in your graveyard, and the black decks do have cards like Pitiless Carnage and Plumb the Forbidden that will kind of dig through your deck and also fill the graveyard. So I'm hoping in the combo decks it'll be kind of trivial, but it will also mean that you're not going to just, turn one combo your opponent, right? You're not going to go like Culling the Weak into Phyrexian Altar, into a couple Ornithopters, into Decaying Soil, into combo off and kill your opponent, right? Like that's just not going to happen on turn 1 because you won't have Threshold, so it means it'll be a late game sort of inevitable win condition rather than a like explosive fast combo, I imagine. Yeah. I'm also adding Sundering Vitae, however you pronounce that. This is just a naturalize with Convoke. It's 2 and a green for an instant instead of 1 and a green for an instant, and you can tap your Ornithopters to pay for the 2 generic mana here. I got excited about this card at exactly the same time as stupid old Bones made me cut a bunch of disenchants from the cube because he had sort of demonstrated pretty conclusively that the creatureless control deck was repeatable and not leading to some of the play patterns that I was excited about. So I got excited about this card and wanted to add it, but also I needed to cut, I don't know, I think I ended up cutting 4 to 6 disenchants from the cube in that moment, and so I didn't have time to also add this, or room also to add this while I was cutting all those other ones. But I am adding it now, and the reasons are, well, first of all, on paper, I think this is kind of perfect, right? It is a disenchant, a naturalize, which are really good cards in this cube. It is one of the cards that are most strongly recontextualized by this format, and so they're nice to include. And the fact this one has Convoke, it like on the card in the text box cares about Ornithopters and is better with Ornithopters in play, obviously. And you get the sort of emotional impact of like your Ornithopters actually helped you cast the spell. They helped you remove your opponent's, big bomb or win condition or whatever, which I think is all very flavorful and cool. Now, practically, I also recognize that even though on paper it superficially has that je ne sais quoi of like fitting here and being sort of very on theme, I don't actually think it matters. I think the creatureless control decks will play this card very happily. They will value it no more highly than they value, or value no less highly than they value just a regular naturalize. The fact that it costs 1 more mana for them is basically irrelevant, because those decks are already running like Heirloom Epic and Thoughtcast and just paying full rate, right? And not worrying about having to get anything discounted on it. And when you're playing those cards at full rate, paying 1 more mana for your disenchant is nothing. So it's really a superficial commitment to the bit, not as much mechanical. I do wish that there was a way to use your Ornithopters to pay for that green pip. If you could make this actually free in this cube, that would be kind of perfect, I think, and would actually make it a reasonably higher pick for the decks with Ornithopters in them compared to the creatureless control decks. But I think as is, it's probably going to be taken and main decked with just as much enthusiasm as any old naturalize, even though it is mechanically slightly different. So I recognize it is really just a superficial commitment to the bit, but I think the superficial stuff matters too. It's not that doesn't matter. So obviously I have decided that it's okay to add 1 more naturalize, even though Bones, made me cut a bunch before. And the reasons are twofold. One is that I was not super satisfied after the sort of Bones culling that a lot of the remaining disenchants were in white, and I think only 2 were in green. I just had actual naturalize and Seal of Primordium in green, but I think there are 4 or 5 in white, and I don't love that split. I would kind of like it to be a little more equal in terms of, which color can deal most with artifacts and enchantments. So if I'm going to have one somewhere, adding it to green makes sense. And the other reason I'm adding it is because I'm making room for it with a cut, and that cut is Bile Blight. Bile Blight is black for an instant. Target creature and all other creatures with the same name get -3/-3 until end of turn. That is functionally almost identical in this cube to Echoing Decay, which is 1 and a black for an instant. Target creature, all other creatures with the same name as that creature get -2/-2 until end of turn. They're very similar here. Obviously, the Bioblade is harder to cast, but also can still kill Ornithopters if they are buffed by 1 toughness, which Echoing Decay can no longer do. And between the two, I think it was kind of easy for me to decide to keep Echoing Decay because of, number one, the -2/-2 being, a direct mirror of the 2 toughest of the Ornithopters. It just feels kind of more like a natural fit. And also the echoing word being in the name of the card. That's like the word echoing has a mechanical meaning in the Magic world, and that is cards that copy themselves, usually because they're targeting things with the same name, if not all the time because they're targeting things with the same name. And I do have all these spells in this cube that do exactly the same thing. I have Echoing Ruin, I have Echoing Boon, I have Echoing. I always think that the blue one's called Echoing Return, but it's not. It's called Echoing Truth. Echoing Truth. So I have other echoing cards, and I like the fact that that word has meaning here, and even a new drafter to this cube could very feasibly pick up on that without having to do a ton of homework, because it's very present in this particular environment. So it's pretty easy to keep that. I will say that I don't think this decision is like completely obvious. Like, it was easy for me for those reasons, but I think there's something to Bioblight, number one, being harder to cast, and that being a benefit from a cube design perspective. Not letting decks splash a 2-mana instant speed Wrath could be a benefit. Maybe I should make decks be harder committed to black in order to cast an instant speed Wrath. There's certainly an argument for that. There's also an argument that, it's better to be able to answer Ornithopters that have 3 toughness sometimes, and that provides, a more reliable sort of Wrath. But at the same time, you can see an argument that knowing that Echoing Decay is the Wrath your opponent has means you could potentially play around it on your own by very intentionally bumping toughness earlier while your board is smaller, or, prioritizing getting your Anthem out first, then playing your Ornithopters to make sure they're insulated from an Echoing Decay. So it's a really interesting sort of small detailed question. Those are the reasons I'm keeping Decay and getting rid of Bioblight, but I could see it going either way. I will say that I don't think I needed both of these cards here, realistically. I think they are very similar at the end of the day, and specifically instant speed Wraths are kind of rough here. I think remaining after this, I will still have Hurkyl's Recall, Echoing Truth, which are obviously not quite the same because they return all your stuff to your opponent's hand. So especially if you're doing it on their turn, they can usually just redeploy everything. The other one I have is Engineered Explosives, obviously, which is on board, which makes a big difference in terms of communicating what your opponent can and can't do. So the sort of hit to the Creatureless Control deck that made room for Sundering Vitae was not another Naturalized, but instead this Bioblight, which is a card that the Creatureless Control decks obviously want equally and or maybe even more highly. So in comes another Disenchant effect, out comes an instant speed board wipe, which I think I still have plenty of board wipes in the cube. I don't think I am going to be wanting for those. The other cuts are really just cards that are kind of underperforming. Sword of Vengeance is a card that I put in here and prized for its flexibility. There are a lot of weird combo decks that want either a haste outlet or a trample outlet, or both. Just imagine decks that can generate an arbitrary amount of mana. For example, let's pretend that you have the new Decaying Soil combo with Ashnod's Altar, but you don't have something that cares about ETBs or cast triggers or def triggers. You just can loop an Ornithopter, make a bunch of mana. If you have a Sword of Vengeance, you can combine that with the Draconic Destiny or Kessig Wolf. Well, Kessig Griffin gives trample already. You can combine it with a number of ways to give an arbitrary amount of power with that mana. And with haste and trample, then you can just actually kill your opponent. Where if you didn't have trample, you might not be able to kill your opponent. They have chump blockers. If you don't have haste, if you're doing it on like a combo turn, you might have to pass a turn and then kill them next turn, which you don't want to give them an opportunity to play all their sorcery speed answers. So it is basically in here as a colorless trample and haste outlet for those combo decks that also I think is somewhat reasonable, maybe not, to just play fairly in the equipment deck. I think most players looked at it and thought it was just a card for the equipment deck and did not see it as a sort of combo outlet, which, that's the sort of curse of the cube designer, right? Like, I'm sort of trying to see through the matrix here, but I think obviously the average player is just like, oh, it's an equipment card for the equipment deck, but it's one of the worst ones. And it is probably the worst one if you're just playing equipment and attacking your opponent. So yeah, that's that. And then Battlefleet Improvisation was a card I added very recently. I think I mentioned it in maybe the previous video about this cube. And yeah, I think before I was just like, I'm going as hard on this effect as I can to like get a sense of how it sort of sits in the cube. And it's been in there for a couple drafts, and now it's coming back out just because I think this is by far the least appealing version of this effect, and it is a very narrow effect. There's really only one deck that's ever going to want this sort of instant speed equip, realistically, and there's other more redundant and more sort of flexible versions of that instant speed equip, so this one's just going to come out to make some room. So yeah, that's the updates to 100 Ornithopters. It is going to be at Inland Northwest Cube Fest next month, and then a couple months after that, I think it's September, is Capital Cube Champs. It's going to be Capital Cube Champs as well. Those are the next two events that this cube is going to be at that are on the calendar. Real quick, I also wanted to, in this video, just touch on a recent Creatureless Control deck that I think is a good sort of foil to the sort of Bones deck that I intentionally wanted to nerf. And this is an example of this deck that I think I'm actually okay with. I'll start off by saying this player won the draft. They went 2-0-1. They had a draw in round one. They flipped a coin for, and they eventually got the win, and then played through the other 2 rounds and won those 2 rounds. So this is a 3 Ornithopter control deck that essentially 3-0'd, which you might think I would be upset about, but I'm really not, and here are the reasons why. First of all, this was drafted and played by Julian Henry, who is probably the most skilled player in our local play group. Julian has played on the Pro Tour before. I think he's currently qualified for the Pro Tour and is just a fantastic player. He's, frequently in the, 2-0 pod or the 2-0 bracket at the end of whatever cube draft he's in. And so a really good player doing well with this deck is not a huge problem for me. And you'll see that it has a lot of the things I've mentioned before about this deck that make it feel okay to me, which is that Julian is really using a lot of cards in a very inefficient way. So Julian's got Metallic Rebuke, Reverse Engineer, Voyage Home, and Heirloom Epic, all of which are quite poor unless you have a number of Ornithopters in play. And with 3 Ornithopters, Julian is pretty unlikely to have any Ornithopters in play. So he's playing a 3-mana leak. He's playing a Heirloom Epic, which is, I guess I can't do the card hover thing here. It's got an activate ability for tap, draw a card, and you can tap a creature. You can basically convoke the ability cost. So this is just an artifact that for him, he basically is going to pay 4 mana every time to draw a card. So really sort of slow card advantage engine that if you have Ornithopters, you can make basically free. You can turn it into just tapping your Ornithopters to draw a card, but he's got to actually tap mana. And then both Reverse Engineer and Voyage Home have effectively affinity for artifacts. Reverse Engineer has Improvise, but it's the same thing, right? He's going to pay 5 mana and 7 mana for these spells most of the time. Now, he does have a couple non-Ornithopter artifacts, and both of those could benefit from that. I guess so could the Metallic Rebuke, the Engineered Explosives and Dispeller's Capsule, and Heirloom Epic itself. But still, these cards are among their worst here, for sure. And in terms of disenchants, Julian has Dispeller's Capsule, Seal of Cleansing, Naturalize, and then Collective Effort can also remove an enchantment, but an enchantment only. And Vindicate can remove anything. And then there is also the Engineer Explosives, which can remove anything, but most of the time in this cube is going to be used to remove all the Ornithopters, right? And then also some counterspells here in the Negate, the Force of Negation, the Steel Sabotage, and then a little more sort of just other interaction with Acquisition of Kozilek and Twisted Image. So the other card he's really not using to its highest potential is Symbiotic Deployment, because this card just says you skip your draw step, and you can pay 1 and tap 2 creatures to draw a card, or pay 1 and tap a creature to draw a card. Let's go check real quick. Not that it really matters. The point is that in his deck, he's basically never going to be able to draw cards with it. It's just going to be a 3-mana enchantment that turns off his draw step, and he was just playing it, 1 tap, 2 untap creatures, draw a card. He was just playing it as a way to not die to decking if it got to the point where that would matter, and I don't believe that came up throughout the night. I could double check with Julian to make sure. So anyway, Julian's basically really driving sideways across my goals here, and I think showing that a lot of these cards, even though they're really much better in other contexts, can still be viable here. So other things about this deck. Julian is playing, 19 lands here through Ornithopters, which are really kind of just to chump block for the most part, and or maybe make some of these spells a little cheaper, but you get the sense that he would much rather have spells here if possible than Ornithopters. If he had more good removal interaction, he'd be playing that instead for sure. And his main win condition was honestly Mnemonic Betrayal, which this just is a Yawgmoth's Will, but for your opponent's graveyard. You could take all of their spells from them, which This cube is great because at a baseline, it means you get all their Ornithopters because they cost no mana, and then you can obviously pay mana for what other non-Ornithopter spells you want to take from their graveyard. And this is the primary way I saw him winning games, was just, taking his opponent's win conditions after, kind of picking their board apart. So, reasons why I'm okay with this deck are, number one, Julian, fantastic player, and had to really work, right? And I watched his games, and he even said at the end, like, they were really interesting, satisfying games. His opponents didn't feel like it was BS. He really was scrapping and scraping to get by. Number two, the matchup he drew, I was told after the fact, what the heck? Oh, this stupid, I guess I haven't turned that off in OBS. Stupid fucking, I guess peace sign puts up balloons. I don't know why that is. Number two, which I won't put up fingers for, is that I was told after the fact that the match he drew with his opponent in round one, that his opponent Emma would have won if her deck was in any order but the order that it was in. I believe that she was looking for one card that Julian had no answer to. I want to say it was Kessig Wolfrun, maybe, and Julian had already used his Vindicate or something like that. And she had a tutor for it in her deck, and she had Kessig Wolfrun, and the last two cards in her deck were the tutor on top and then Kessig Wolfrun on the bottom, and just didn't have time to actually kill Julian with it before she died to decking, which obviously that amount of variance just happens sometimes, right? So yeah, this draft felt like it was kind of a slog for Julian to make this deck work, and again, he's one of the most skilled players, and so if this wants to come together sometimes, I'm kind of okay with it, is what it comes down to. And maybe my tune will change on that in the future if this ends up being more regular in occurrence than I expect. But I think, I think Julian could have drafted the same deck the same night and not done as well. Could have just, his opponent he drew with in round one could have just not had their best card at the bottom of their deck, and then he would have lost round one, and who knows what his record would have been. Or, some of those close games could have just broken differently with their opponent having other draws. I watched the finals, and in game 3 of the finals, I felt like his opponent was in a really strong position and then just drew lands for a lot of turns in a row, right? Like, I think that Julian will not, be able to sit down repeatedly at this cube and draft this deck successfully, is my read of it right now. Anyway, that's it. I've talked for way too long yet again. But that's updates to 100 Ornithopters, and thanks for tuning in. Oh, and nobody buy any cards from TCG Player eBay, maybe ever again. Don't cross that picket line.